Alright, YouTube friends, I'm just jumping on here tonight because I had the time and it's been on my mind. You know, I've been on Twitter as the reparations conversation has picked up in the mainstream. You know, spurred, of course, by ADOS, American Descendants of Slavery, you know, led by the likes of Yvette Carnell, Antonio Moore, the scholarship of Sandy Darity. You see these same kind of like fallacies over and over again as you're reading through the arguments against what is, you know, a centuries old justice claim. And so, you know, part of what my channel is a channel that is for ADOS folks to like know that I'm going to represent our interest, and one of those interests is reparations. So like when I talk about my political affiliations, I'm policy over party. Like I don't care what your party is. You know, Kanye's like, he's the birthday party. That's like neither here nor there. Like if you don't have a day one reparations plan, then you're not a candidate for me, because it means you don't understand the history of the United States, a country you're trying to lead, and you also don't understand what's plaguing the population that's been made for centuries of bottom caste, the population that this country was built on. When we talk about capitalism, not just capitalism, it was chattel slavery that capitalism rested on and made the United States the greatest country in the world. And so when we talk about, you know, all those things, you know, folks again bring up these same like counter arguments to what is a rightful justice claim. And, you know, while many years ago folks would have said that reparations is a pipe dream, never could have happened. I even saw on Fox freaking today, which was a lot of folks were like, yeah, I think it's important that the reparations conversation is on a mainstream network like Fox News. But they were saying basically that this ridiculous equation that they put up would equate to, you know, reparations being 6.4 quadrillion, which is some astronomical number, when we know the estimate has been time and time again in the more understandable and reasonable range of 17 trillion. And so in many ways, glad to have the conversation become mainstream, but there are all these counter arguments that are completely ridiculous, meant to derail the conversation, straw man arguments, different other types of fallacies. I'm just gonna go over those because I was thinking about them tonight, and I think it's important for folks to be able to really understand that when people make this counter argument, as we've kind of gone over time and time again, and I want to put that information out there, that you think you know something, but you really, as Yvette Carnell would say, you don't know enough. This is years and years of studying data from PhDs, political scientists, legal experts, studying this information. You know, not just decades, you know, centuries of, my computer like to close. Why would it close? I was just typing on it. Centuries of folks really studying this topic from the time, you know, after Abraham Lincoln said 40 acres and a mule up until now, as that justice claim has yet to be fulfilled. You know, I always tell people, if you want to say that African Americans, descendants of slavery, were made citizens, and as the United States you fail to guarantee us the rights of citizens, as we see with various massacres, decades, centuries of lynchings, redlining, the mass incarceration that stemmed from you know, the black codes and convict leasing before that. Just centuries and centuries of disenfranchisement. So regardless of race, you have a group of citizens who, based on their lineage, have been denied the full rights of the citizenship that you granted them. And so let me start here, because I could go on all day talking about just that specific stuff. But I'm going to start talking about kind of what I was thinking. And so the first thing I hear is folks say, my ancestors never owned slaves. And so you might see someone who's from an Eastern European family whose ancestors got to the United States via Ellis Island up in the Northeast in the early 1900s and say, yeah, you know, slavery ended in 1865 when the Civil War did. My family never owned slaves. Well, number one, when you come to the United States, you decide to immigrate, work here, apply for a green card, become a citizen, then you incur the debt that's associated with all those benefits. When you're a citizen, you get to drive to work on a paved road. You get to walk in your neighborhood and dial 911 should you have an emergency. You get to own a business and have a bank account and ensure that your business is backed by the guarantees of the Constitution, and that you can decide to serve who you want to, and that if someone were to take your money in a corrupt situation, that you have the backing of the United States government. When you receive all those benefits, you also incur all the debts that go along with it. So that's not an excuse that your family never owned slaves. If the United States, which it does, has a debt, and you have the benefits that go along with being in the United States, then you also incur the debts. And if you don't understand that, then you got to go back to your basic, like, 9th grade economics class. 2, you also benefit from the legacy of slavery and everything that the United States was able to build off of slavery. You know, if you grew up here, you might often hear the saying that cotton was king, not only in the South, but that money that was brought in through trading cotton back to the UK was used all over the United States to trade for, you know, tobacco in the Southeast, or to trade for textiles from the Northeast, or coal or steel or other different types of things. So as the United States was built, the railroads across the Southeast, the railroads that go from the Eastern United States to California, the big steel factories, coal factories, the Industrial Revolution that occurred in the Northeastern United States following the end of slavery, all of that was built off of the profits accumulated from slavery. And were it not for the society that was built off of that wealth that was accumulated, most folks who immigrate here wouldn't want to come here. It would not have become the United States of America had we not had a system in place to make the colonies and everything else that expanded west prosperous. It would not have become the United States had we not had cotton and tobacco and the Civil War that, you know, declared that all men are created equal. If not for the civil rights of the 1960s, the Immigration Act would not be the case. We would not have an influx of folks from the Caribbean and Africa and different parts of Southeast Asia, if not for those civil rights that African Americans, American descendants of slavery, fought for during the 1960s. And so all of that is a result of privileges that's been afforded to folks that are not ADOS. And so when you say, you know, my family didn't own slaves, you still benefited from slavery. And so you have to expect folks to want to cash in on a debt that's due. The third sub point of this a whole argument is my ancestors never owned slaves is the fact that reparations that are due to American descendants of slavery are not just for slavery. I talked about this briefly earlier, that reparations are not due only because, you know, 1776 we become the United States. We declare that all men are created equal, that we are endowed with by our creators with certain unalienable rights. And then we violate that as a country. You know, we have slavery not only where there are reparations due for the labor and the denial of rights, but for the convict leasing that followed, the black codes where descendants of slavery, African Americans were targeted for vagrancy, not having a job when one wasn't afforded to them, for being homeless when they were thrown off of the plantations they once lived, for not being able to provide for their family when they're not given a job in the only economy that exists, that's owned by a mostly, you know, white wealthy society. A convict leasing system that says if you commit these minor crimes, then you owe me your life. You owe me death, or you owe me your life, or you owe me some absurd amount of money that you couldn't possibly afford since you just came out of slavery. You know, morphs into a system where we see decades and decades of lynching when African Americans, descendants of slavery, are fighting for their rights to vote, to occupy space. You know, famously, this is when Tulsa happens. We see a thriving town, Black Wall Street, that's destroyed out of jealousy and envy. Even with as little as we had, ADOS thrived, and it was destroyed out of envy and jealousy, because had we been able to build wealth, capital, own our own resources, then we would need to be subjected to a system of white supremacy created by the United States government, created and upheld by the United States government. And then the fourth part of this is that reparations is not a personal debt, primarily and mostly. You know, I think you can get to an argument where maybe. But at its core, reparations is a debt owed by the United States government. Again, chattel slavery was sanctioned and allowed by the United States government in a land that was declared home of the free and the brave, where men were, despite who they were, where they were born, were guaranteed certain unalienable rights, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And so when that happens, it becomes not a personal debt that white people, immigrants, people of color owe, that you owe. You got to pay taxes every month. This is my reparations tax I pay every month. My $300 out of my check or whatever it is. It's a debt by the United States government. And if we're being frank, there are a lot of corporations and companies in the United States that also owe a debt that benefit off of slavery. A lot of universities, private colleges that benefited from slavery directly from the labor, from the ideas, from the intellectual property of slavery and everything subsequent to it. Prison labor, mass incarceration. There are private companies that still benefit from a legacy of mass incarceration and Jim Crow. So the government owes and private companies owe. And if you feel it in your heart, sure. Okay, so that's really number one. My ancestors never had slaves. Sorry you incur the debt. You benefit. It's not just for slavery, and it's not just a personal debt. It's not coming out of your pocket in the sense that you're not gonna feel any extra pinch. You pay taxes now to all sorts of things that you don't agree with. And if you don't pay taxes, you go to jail. There's no person in the United States who agrees with 100% of what they pay taxes for, but we still do it. Welcome to the United States. Second big argument is, how do we decide who gets reparations? We're all mixed up. There's been a lot of interracial marriage. There's been a lot of immigration. You know, why should a black person whose family came here in 1965 get reparations for slavery? Well, this is not like, you're not clever. This is not a new argument. There's already been decades, if not centuries, of scholarship behind exactly who gets reparations. Two really clear points here. One, to receive reparations from the United States government as American descendant of slavery for centuries of oppression, you have to be descended from a slave. So as I talked about earlier, most other black people who are not descended from slaves in the United States came here after 1965. With the addition of multiple civil rights acts put into place. Whether you want to say that those immigration laws got put into place because of United States government wanting to create a buffer class of model minority immigrants of African descent and Asian descent, or whether we became a more democratic society. That's the case. I can go online for about 30 minutes and trace my lineage to the 1870s. And 99.9% of the time, if I can trace my lineage, grandparent by grandparent, great-grandparent, great-great-great-grandparent, all Louisiana, Texas, Georgia, then I'm most likely descended from the killing fields of the South. From the southern United States, from chattel slavery. A lot of folks are ashamed to admit that, and there's no shame in that. That's what's needed to get a justice claim paid out. So you must be descended from a slave in the United States. The second thing is you must have identified as black or African American for the last 10 to 12 years. Dr. Darity has said 12 years in his book, Purity Equality. And, you know, ADS website, ADOS101.com, what we just talked about, is 10 years. So 10 to 12 years. That means that not only, one, as a descendant of a slave, you've endured the generational poverty of a descendant of slavery, which we've seen in wealth data, housing data, incarceration data, income data, across the board, that descendants of slavery have different outcomes due to systemic racism and oppressive systems that have been put in place. You have to have a bottom caste to have an upper caste. You cannot have an upper caste wealth if you do not have poor people. And so if you've identified as black, or excuse me, if you've descended from slavery, then you most likely have that legacy. And if you've identified as black, then you've most likely been treated as black. You know, there are some folks who, a small percentage of people who are white passing, but even if you're light skinned, even if you're biracial, because of the one drop rule and the laws that have been put in place, you most likely still identify as black and you're treated as black. Due to a system that's allowed, you know, colorism to perpetuate, designating anybody who has any amount of black blood or decides that they're black is black. So I think that kind of gets rid of all those what ifs. You have to be descended from a slave. So anyone who just got, a person who may have just came to the country, and you say, well, you know, they come here with $100,000 in their pocket, why should they get reparations? They wouldn't. And then two, you have to have identified as black. And assume that identity. You don't just get to say, well, 10 generations ago, 6 generations ago, 3 generations ago, my grandma was black. But, you know, you've been living as a white person. That doesn't count. Okay, so I'll keep go there because I'm not trying to talk for hours. 3, I've heard that a reparations movement that is specific to American descendants of slavery and not all black people across the world or in this country is xenophobic. That if we don't include every you know, the almost 45 million black people in the United States in this reparations claim, then that's not fair. And you know, the police don't ask what country you're from when they pull you over, or cab driver doesn't ask, Uber driver doesn't ask what country you're from when they decide not to give you a ride. Well, one, legally, a claim has to be specific. If I live in Seattle and a black woman that's like in Los Angeles is suing the city because they wouldn't protect her from unfair housing, I can't jump onto her claim because I have nothing to do with it. Her claim is specific to her. Just because I'm another black woman in the United States who has been oppressed doesn't mean I get to jump on any legal claim for a wrong that's been perpetuated. Just like I wouldn't jump on a reparations claim for Japanese Americans who were interned in the United States, who were in internment camps in the United States during and previous to and probably after World War II. Or the reparations claims that Native Americans have. Those are unique claims. I can't jump on a reparations claim for Native Americans, Indigenous Americans, and say, you know, land was taken away from me in Oklahoma, knowing that I'm a descendant of slavery from Louisiana, Texas, Mississippi, and previous to that, most likely Western Africa. I can't jump on a justice claim from Jewish folks in Germany saying that, you know, my property, my rights were taken away. It just doesn't work like that. Legal claims don't work like that. What kind of sense does that make? None at all. So legal claim has to be exclusive. A black person who is an immigrant whose family got here in the 1980s can't make a claim that their ancestors were owed a legal claim from labor that occurred during the antebellum period prior to the Civil War. And along with that, like realistically, immigrants didn't suffer this generational poverty. Most immigrants, and I'll try to put the data up there, outpace Native Black Americans in almost every category. And you often hear the claim is because we don't work enough or we're lazy. That's just not true. If we were lazy or didn't work enough, then we wouldn't have been in the cotton fields working. We wouldn't be the best athletes. The best in almost every category that we're allowed to excel in. And so oftentimes immigrants of every ethnicity come here with more wealth, because just like poor Americans who cannot travel internationally, cannot immigrate, or immigrate with the E, to different places, neither can poor people from other countries, unless obviously they're walking over a border from the north or the south. And then at the end of the day, if there are recent Americans who have a justice claim, that justice claim is often with the home country. So folks from the Caribbean, Haiti, for example, have a justice claim with France. Didn't Haiti end up paying France back when they were freed from slavery, the Haitian slaves? When in reality, France owes them billions, if not trillions of dollars, the Haitian people. Same with Jamaica and the UK. And, you know, the native people in Australia with the UK. And other groups. Southeast Asian groups with France. United States. Multiple African countries, with the vast majority of European countries. I think I saw something the other day that said that the United States has, out of any country or continent, has the most bases in AFRICOM, which is the African continent, basically. I know the United States has a lot of military bases overseas in Japan and Korea. Some left over from Germany. Basically every war that the United States has won. We've never really had a war like that in Africa, though, so to think that there are all these bases in Africa, you know, is ridiculous. So I guess the next one, number 4, is, you know, I kind of alluded at this area. What about the Irish or the Japanese or the Native Americans or the Jewish people? Don't they deserve reparations too? See this argument all the time, we're Irish, we're slaves too. You know, it's just a lie. The Irish people were never slaves in the United States. Even mainstream history books will tell you that the Irish people came over here as indentured servants, meaning that, you know, Irish immigrants who immigrated to the United States decided to provide an extended amount of labor, or I would say a fixed duration of labor, for passage and a place to stay and food to eat while they paid off the debt. They were not slaves. They were not chattel slaves. They were not owned as property. They were not denied rights for centuries. Irish people assimilated to whiteness long ago and assumed those benefits that go along with whiteness. And again, if the Irish people have a claim, that's a unique claim. Make that claim with the United States. The United States has more than enough money. Jewish people, for a Holocaust that occurred and perpetuated by Germany, have received reparations. And so I think, like I'm saying again, they received reparations for the atrocities of the Holocaust, not for slavery. So if you think you have a claim with the United States, make that claim. Besides that, talked about earlier, Japanese Americans and Japanese immigrants were given reparations. And if they deem that they want more, I support them in pursuing that claim. Native Americans were provided with different types of reparations. If you really look at the numbers and the atrocities that occurred and the tiny bit of land mass that Native indigenous folks have been allowed to be sovereign of the United States, it's abysmal. And so I also support their claim. But those are different and unique claims, as I talked about earlier. And so I was getting to number 5. Okay, say we pay reparations, the United States pays reparations, but it can't be cash. This is probably the one that like gets under my skin the most, because it just defies all logic of how we understand credit and debt and using loans and paying somebody back. Like if you borrow cash on your credit card, you go to the store, you go to Macy's, and you use your debit card. You use your credit card, and you say, I want to buy that $50 dress. The next month, you don't then get to decide that you're going to pay Visa or MasterCard back in Chuck E. Cheese tickets. Or in hand sanitizer. These days, you don't get to decide that. So if my ancestors worked for free and were not paid cash, we're not provided with adequate health care, we're not provided with adequate food, land, opportunity, civil rights, voting rights, then that is what is due back. You don't get to change the terms of agreement or decide that you want to pay back something that you find convenient, that you didn't actually borrow. So if the debt is cash, if the debt is homes burned down, businesses taken away, being redlined, being denied GI Bill, being denied the GI benefits, then that's what's due back, all those things. So yeah, cash is due back. At a minimum, a couple $100,000 per person, not per family, per person, per descendant of slavery. Education programs, loan programs, small business programs, housing programs, land ownership programs, all those things are due. The person who owes the debt doesn't get to decide how and when they pay it back. If that's the case, you declare bankruptcy. And we see that the United States has plenty of money, as I'll get to later when we talk about how easy we paid out these payments for COVID. When it came time for Trump to prove that he was for the working class or the people who needed care the most. Debtors don't get to decide the terms of agreement. Along with that, it's not just cash. More than cash was taken. We see these job announcements that say only this demographic may apply, only Indians may apply. And sure, it was a mistake, but that's the truth. When you've been denied opportunities that every other citizen gets, and even non-citizens get, then that should be the retribution. That should be the reward. That should be what is owed back. Not only that, but when we talk about mass incarceration, educational gaps, which, you know, I could go on for hours about that alone. That, sure, education gaps exist in some instances, but we also know that we have HBCUs that are full of descendants of slavery who graduate every year and are still denied jobs in the STEMs. They're still denied opportunities to compete with their peers despite having education. So, you know, while education is an answer, it's not the answer. Some people argue that, oh, just give us land. No, with cash you can buy land. So when I say that I understand that it's reparations is more than cash, cash can still answer all these questions. With cash you can buy land. With cash you can pay for tuition. With cash you can get health care. With cash you can send your kids to private school. With cash you can start your small business. All those things are possible with cash. Besides the fact that, as we saw during this pandemic, no one was willing to accept food stamps, EBT card. No one was willing to accept some alternative to direct, you know, cash in the bank, to direct checks. You think Trump would have really came out with a policy that said, okay, I know folks can't work, everyone's lost their job, and so to make it okay, I'm gonna give you this card where you can go get $300 worth of groceries. That's it. Don't ask for anything else. I don't trust you with the cash. You might go buy Jordans or iPhones. You might pay your rent. You may make sure that childcare is provided for. Or even if we're afforded that grace, and Trump said, you know, I'm not going to give you cash, but if you have a kid, I'll pay for the childcare so you can work from home. Well, that's nice if I could work from home, if my job didn't require me to go into the office every day, or to go into work every day, to go into the factory. That would be great if I could stay home. I can't though, because I can't get hired at the tech companies where I can work from home. Because of my lineage, I can only be hired at companies where I'm an essential worker. Or I've been relegated to industries where I'm an essential worker. So cut the check. Cut the check, basically. Point 6 kind of ties into 5, where I talked about the stimulus checks. Folks will say America doesn't have the money. Well, we left the gold system a long time ago, where how much money the United States had depended on how much gold we had in reserve. I know Fort Knox still exists, but, you know, I know enough to know that there was no hesitancy when it was time to provide for folks during the COVID pandemic. You know, it wasn't enough. It's still not enough, but at least it happened. And so I know it doesn't take years and years of a study. It doesn't take years and years of debate by Congress. It doesn't take a Congress that is, you know, a one-party Congress, or executive and legislative body that are the same party. It doesn't take any of that. So when we talk about HR 40 and these bills and these legislative moves to study reparations, and then folks will say that America doesn't have the money, we can't do it, that it's, you know, some 6.4, 4.6, whatever, quadrillion dollars. No, we've studied this. We've studied this for centuries. It's around the trillions. 17 trillion. We know that when America wants to get checks to where they're supposed to go, we see it every year with taxes, that it gets there. America keeps great records, especially with folks who have immigrated here recently. And so you can't argue with me that America doesn't have the money. We see time and time again that we do, with the billions that is spent on the military, the trillions that we just use to bail out corporations that then use the money to buy their stock back. We saw it with the billion-dollar endowments that universities and colleges have, and yet they still have the audacity to charge students full-price tuition, while they have to take classes online, don't get afforded the opportunity to have a safe haven in the dorms, or to have that interaction with the teachers that they often need to be successful. They don't get any of that, but they still get paid. They pay full price tuition with universities who have billion-dollar endowments. So the money is there. Universities, private companies, government can pay these reparations, especially to American descendants of slavery. Make their tuition free. Give them free health care. Kaiser, Swedish, all these other places that I know of, that are near me at least. Harvard, Yale, Princeton, these schools that were built. Federal government, federal jobs guarantee, that's another part of this. It's not about party policy. And so then number 7, what about people like Oprah or LeBron? You know, Oprah is a billionaire. I think folks say Byron Allen's a billionaire. Bob Johnson, Michael Jordan, billionaire. LeBron, Kanye, Jay-Z. You know, do they get reparations? One, yes, you don't get to decide that you don't want to pay a debt back because the person you owe the debt to just happens to be successful. You know, Bank of America probably has billions of dollars in profit. Wells Fargo, billions of dollars in profit. Capital One, Chase, billions of dollars in profit. That doesn't mean you get to decide not to pay them back every month because they're successful. So despite the success of folks like LeBron and Oprah and whoever else, they still get the same as everyone else. Everyone else whose ancestors were wrong. Not only that, but you know, folks like Oprah and LeBron are first generation wealthy. They're first generation rich and wealthy. So that means that everyone that came before them has lived the oppression that every other ADOS person has. And then the next thing, I would say that white supremacy and racism isn't confined to poor folks or even middle class folks. That I would posit that folks like Oprah and LeBron also experiences. I mean, whether it's something as obvious as them painting the N-word on LeBron's garage, or Oprah, you know, not truly owning her own company, her own network. You know, what opportunities weren't afforded to Oprah because Oprah is Oprah and not Martha Stewart. And you'll never catch me caping for Oprah, but you can't tell me that there isn't racism in Hollywood, there isn't racism in the NBA, there isn't racism in the NFL, there isn't racism on broadcast TV, that there isn't racism in every facet of what we've built in this country, what has been built in this country. So yes, an entity that owes a debt doesn't get to decide if they pay it back because the person they owe it to is successful. And then racism isn't confined to just poor folks. Poor white folks are racist. Poor POC are racist. Rich black folks experience racism as much as they like to deny it sometimes. As much as they think they don't. They do. They just don't want to admit it. Because as hard as they work, they still experience racism. That's it. You can pull your ass all the way up to the sky with your bootstraps. But there's going to be somebody there still telling you, Alright, that's it. That's my 7. That's what I see all the time, and I'm just like, stop. You're not clever. This isn't new. This has been debated and theorized on for forever. Reparations isn't unique to American descendants of slavery. Reparations isn't a rights issue exclusive to us. It's a moral issue. It's a civil rights issue. If America decides that it is a country where citizens are provided with rights guaranteed by the Constitution, then it's also a constitutional right. It's a constitutional. It's that ADOS folks are owed. Reparations. So sure, argue against what's moral. Make these arguments that say there's slaveries throughout the centuries, millennium. That doesn't make slavery right. Doesn't make it okay. The United States is able to pay, and so it should. You can argue that slavery came from Slovakia or wherever you want to derive the name for, and that the Greeks had slaves and the Romans had slaves, and that Africans sold the black people to the white people. Sure. All that is true. It doesn't make any of it right. It doesn't mean that then the United States is absolved of a debt. It doesn't mean that then we get to bear all the costs and the weight of being descendants of slavery in the United States. Corporations, these universities get to skate off scot-free. We gotta bear all the burden, the cost, the debt for generation and generation. You know, this is, what, a legacy of 400 years. Folks will say, oh yeah, welfare, food stamps, childcare, that's all reparations. No. Again, if it's not cash, then it's not reparations. Free labor was provided. Slave labor was provided. You don't go to work and then say, okay, you can pay me in Chuck E. Cheese coins. You want cash for your effort, because that is what we use in the United States of America. Cash is used to provide for your way of living. And so any repair has to also be in cash. But I can go on that for, you know, much longer. That's it. You know, tell me what you think. What am I missing? Those are the 7 that I thought of. What I need to add to the list below. And then tell me what other topics you want me to cover. Either about ADOS or reparations. What don't you understand, like you want to hear me talk more about. Please leave a comment, and then also subscribe to the channel if you appreciate what I'm putting out, and then like this video. It's completely free, of course, and then I appreciate you tuning in. Had to get that off my chest. It's like, folks, it's not that hard. Read a book. But okay, talk to you next time. Bye.